In this episode of Voice of the Sea, we're going to the deepest parts of the ocean with the Hadal Profiler, a new science tool being developed by University of Hawai'i researchers. The Hadal Profiler will dive to the deepest parts of the ocean trenches, measuring water chemistry and ocean currents, as well as capturing video of organisms as it travels from the surface to 11,000 meters deep. We check out the profiler and some of its instruments. Head to the lab to see organisms discovered in the deep ocean trenches and meet some of the researchers, engineers, and students who are part of the team developing the Hadal Profiler. We catch up with the team at the UH Marine Center, just as they arrived back from testing the Hadal Profiler at sea. Tell me a little bit about this Hadal Profiler project.
The spark for it was a random conversation I had with Glenn Carter. Well, I'm a chemist, Glenn's a physical oceanographer. So one day randomly I said to him, hey Glenn, shouldn't the trenches be full of salty water from the last ice age? Because we know during the ice age that there were large ice sheets on the continents, so the ocean was saltier then. And because it's saltier, it should be denser. So the trenches should have filled with that salty, dense water, and it should still be there. Well, this was my naive chemistry sort of thought.
Describe for me the environment of these Hadal trenches.
The trenches are the deepest places in the ocean, and it's not just trenches. There's actually troughs and some other geological features that get really deep. They have rocky scarps and cliffs and boulder fields and muddy plains, and they're very diverse. But we're talking about water that's greater than 6,000 meters down. These areas only occupy 1% of the ocean's seafloor, but because they go all the way down to 11,000 meters, they represent 45% of the ocean's depth range, nearly half of it.
So we looked into seeing if there was any data. We found a paper by a Japanese scientist of a long time ago who'd actually got some water samples, the only water samples from within the trench that have ever been collected. And this is a very famous guy, and he'd calculated the ventilation time was a few decades. And this makes no sense from the physics that we understand of ventilation processes.
What is ventilation?
Okay, ventilation is the renewal of the waters from the surface waters or from any other waters. So we say ventilation because you're bringing oxygen down, which get used up in the deep ocean normally. To ventilate down that deep just through normal molecular diffusion processes would take tens or hundreds of thousands of years, and it hasn't been that long. So then we started thinking about, well, maybe the question really is how are they ventilating, not whether they're ventilating.
The question that interested me from the physics side is what's driving this overturning within the trench, this ventilating of the trenches, because the timescales between the trench and the overlying abyssal water are very fast compared to the timescales we associate with the deep ocean. Global deep ocean circulation is about 1,000 years, and we're talking estimates for the trenches of 10 to 40 years to get the water down 5 kilometers from 6 kilometers depth to 11 kilometers depth. There's been no work done on that, so that was my motivation for pushing this forward.
The trenches, which are the most common kind of Hadal feature, are subduction zones, where one oceanic plate is diving below another plate, and so you can think of this environment as this long, thin chain, this edge where the plate is being subducted underneath another plate. Kind of like a canyon, except one side's steep and one side's much more shallow. Because it's a subduction zone, there are earthquakes happening all the time. A plate is moving underneath another plate. And so when an earthquake is triggered, sediments that have accumulated on the sides of the trench fall downhill. Avalanches. Think of underwater avalanches. We call them turbidity flows. That also brings organic material. The end result, food. The food supply is actually greater in the deepest axis of the trench than it is at shallower depths on the side. And there is some data that shows that densities of animals increase with depth. This is the opposite pattern to whatever you find in the rest of the deep ocean. This makes trenches kind of unique.
I wrote a paper which has been published in a legitimate journal that suggests that the bottom of the Arctic Ocean is ventilated by plumes that come off the shelves and go down the edges of the ocean. They're basically turbidity currents. So they're underwater avalanches of sediment. The first thing is to get some water samples and see if we can see a chemical signal, because then we can start to try and understand what we think is going on. We don't really know what's down there. I mean, I think Jeff will tell you, people have used landers which go to the bottom and look at various things. But nobody knows about the water column, and the whole business of how does the water column get replaced is really interesting, because if we really see that that's going on there, and like I've suggested in the Arctic, then we've just discovered a process that hasn't been thought about before when we talk about the physics of the ocean.
And what lives down there?
What lives down there is a bit of a mystery. We know a bunch about what lives on the seafloor in trench environments. You find brittle stars and sea cucumbers and these little crustaceans called amphipods. And I have a jar of these right here. These little guys right here are shrimp-like crustaceans. Amphipods are very common. You can see them on reefs. And if you go to the beach and you turn over, flotsam that's washed up, sometimes there are these little things trying to crawl away. Those are little amphipods. And there's a host of different species that live in the trenches too. And there are fishes in the trenches, and that's, my favorite. I like fish. We have snail fishes. They live down to a depth of about 8,000 meters.
And just like other deep sea fish, they're kind of big heads and skinny tails.
Yeah, very similar to a lot of other deep sea fish that way. In the trench, we often would place a dead fish on the seafloor to attract all the animals to a camera that we simply dropped off the side of the ship. It just fell to the bottom, landed on the bottom. It's different than the profiler because it actually is intended to go to the seafloor. And this is what you see. You can see the bait that we put out. This is a large crustacean called an amphipod, and all of these translucent pinkish animals are snailfishes. Snailfishes are the deepest living fishes in the world. They live down to 8,000 meters. So this is the type of environment you would see at some of the much greater depths. And that is just clouds of scavenging amphipod crustaceans. These are some of the dominant animals, mobile animals, when you get below the depths of fishes. There are also lots of sea cucumbers and brittle stars and other organisms living in the trench. This is just an easy way to census some of the more mobile fauna. This is some video from the video camera on the Hadal Profiler. The animals are going to zip by, but it'll give you an idea, and I'm gonna slow it down. There went a fish. And that was something, I'm not sure what it was, probably a jelly. That is a shrimp shooting by. That is a fish called cyclothone. And that long thing is a siphonophore, which is a gelatinous animal related to like Portuguese man-o-war that a lot of people see at beaches and things like that. It's a colonial jelly that forms a big long chain. Last thing I was gonna show you was one of the bioacoustics clips. Basically a fancy fish finder. It sends out a sound pulse, and it bounces off of animals, organisms in the water column, and that echo is recorded. And what you're seeing here is depth on this axis, and then all of these dots are the echoes. So the more of them there are and the brighter it is, the more stuff is in the water column. And this is a deployment that was done when the descent was during the day, and then the ascent, the sun had started to go down. This is right after sunset, and you'll notice how much more intensity there is at the top here, and that's because a lot of the plankton has moved up into surface waters already. And you'll see there's a lot more here. That's because animals are kind of moving between the daytime and the nighttime depths. But this is the kind of data that we would get, except when we go to the trench, it's going to be really, really deep, and we don't entirely know what we're going to find.
We free fall it off the ship, so literally put it over the side and let it go. And as it goes down, it needs to fall at a specific velocity. When it comes back, it needs to come up at a specific velocity, and all of that is just based on weight and buoyancy. There's changes in the density of seawater from the surface down to the deep, deep ocean. And so that changes buoyancies and compressibility of all of the materials. So that was a big challenge. This middle belt here, there's kind of this white plastic pieces and these tubes that go inside. It's called the GEMC, the Geo-Electromagnetic Current Meter. There's little electrodes in here that are able to measure that. Very, 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 very small voltages and amounts of electrical current. This is a camera and two lights that create kind of a cone of light out here for the camera. They want to be able to look at amount of biological stuff in the water. And instead of just getting a vertical stripe, get kind of a corkscrew look.
Oh, I see.
So looking all around.
So like a 360 degrees of what's happening in the water column.
Yeah, we're trying to get it to rotate about once every 12 to 16 seconds, which is fairly slow. And so we have little wings that bolt on here, and we can adjust the angle of attack on those wings. And so we bring it almost all the way totally parallel, and it still rotates too fast. And so we got some smaller wings on this trip, and with pretty high angles of attack on the small wings, it rotated too slow. Okay. So we're slowly homing in on that number. This is the tail cone.
Oh.
So this whole thing lives kind of at the top, and when we see it on the surface on the ship, it's floating at about this height. And so there's 3 different beacons on here. One of them sends a radio signal, and the ship has a RDF, or radio direction finder, and so they'll tell us where it is. It doesn't tell us how far it is. There's also a flasher, so if it's at night. And then this guy communicates with satellites and actually sends us via email a GPS position. So usually we just listen for the radio. We hear a beep. Okay, it's at the surface. Where is it? If you don't see it looking around, go check your email. It'll tell you where it is.
Go check your email.
Yeah, literally.
Are you excited about going to the bottom of the trench?
Yeah, it's different for me. Like, I'm really excited to get it back each time. And then I go in and I say, hey, did you guys get any data? And the scientists are really excited about the data. And I was like, okay, you got something good. Let's go again.
My background is in the turbulent mixing field, so that's why the microrider's in there, and to understand the mixing patterns in the ocean, the salinity and temperature give us the density, so we can figure out the density stratification and what's driving that. Also, the current meter was something that I wanted on there, so that we could see if there's any evection or how things are moving. And with all of those, we can actually estimate internal tides. The ocean, because of stratification, the surface tides we're all familiar with, have an internal expression within the ocean that are weird and fascinating, but they travel on angles, so that they travel not just on interfaces in the ocean, but on defined angles through the ocean. And that is one of the main energy sources for the deep ocean. The internal tides are generated at the bottom of the ocean on seafloor topography. So you're transferring energy from the Earth-Moon system into mixing of the ocean.
Where do you plan to test or take your Hadal Profiler after you've gone through these testing cruises?
So we got funded to go to the Kermadec Trench north of New Zealand, or northeast of New Zealand. The Kermadec Trench should be, I think, the easiest one to understand how it's ventilated, because if anything can be ventilated by just direct displacement of the water that's in the trench, it'll be the Kermadec Trench. It's also a region that has quite a bit of internal tide activity at various places along the trench, and then other places, zero internal tide activity.
So is this Hadal Profiler the first of its kind in the world?
It's certainly the first one that has this amount of stuff on the same package. So it's not just its depth range that's unique, it's the amount of different measurements that are made on the same package, actually makes it unique for a shallow instrument as well.
The University of Hawaii Sea Grant College program focused on Hawaii's coasts and its communities through sustainable development, safe seafood supply, sustainable coastal tourism, hazard resilience, and healthy coastal ecosystems. Hawaii's Sea Grant.
You're watching Voice of the Sea. We're learning about the new cutting-edge research tool, the Hadal Profiler. its sophisticated electronics, and what it takes to collect and bring back water samples from the deepest ocean depths.
This is the actual water collector itself. This is taken off the Hadal Profiler, and it sits under one of these cones. It sits under this cone, exactly. And basically you have these tubes. They're about like 150 milliliters each for liquid. And so once the profiler will reach the bottom and it starts to make its way back up, it's going to flow through. These different bottles are going to turn like this.
Oh, I see.
Yes. So the water is going to fill through, and then once it's like, let's say, reached another depth, it's going to switch the bottle. And then now this bottle is going to be filled while this one is closed. So it's like you're almost tripping different bottles at different depths. And so one of the things that they've hypothesized is that maybe there's turbidity currents or like these underwater landslides that are entraining that water down to depths. And so one way you can measure that is not only nutrients, but also trace metals, because in the ocean, there's a lot more in the surface, and then as you start to get deeper, things get scavenged, things will sorb into particles, and then they will drop off into the sediments. And then if there's something like an underwater landslide or underwater avalanche, it will resuspend all of those trace metals. Usually the common ones are aluminum, manganese, and iron. And so because we know that they shouldn't have certain concentrations at depth, if we measure like, not like a plume, but if we see that there's like activity going on or elevated concentrations of trace metals or nutrients, we can see with the chemistry where the water is going.
So that's why it's important for you to measure the water throughout the water column all the way to the deepest depth, because you're looking for change or something that's doesn't seem quite right.
Yeah, exactly. And then when you put that together with the other physical parameters that the Hadal Profiler can do, it really puts together a full picture. It's just really interesting in terms of measuring any chemistry down there, because I don't think anyone's measured chemistry at the bottom of the trenches. So I'm excited really just for the questions that are going to come out, because we can have all our hypotheses all day, but at the end of the day, like whatever we end up measuring is going to be exciting no matter what. And so it will kind of tell us, okay, is the water actually stagnant down there? No, it's not. It's maybe getting ventilated. Okay, well, how's that happening? We have this chemical data to show that it may be happening this way. So I'm excited for just the road that we're going to go down.
So I'm the programmer and a little bit of electrical engineers of the project. So I handle everything from the system integrations to the software to user interface design, and then all the testing and stuff.
So you build the sort of computer program that they would see in order to set the profiler up to go over the side of the ship?
Yes. Like a typical cast, before you drop it down, there are a lot of things you need to configure it, tell the profiler what to do. Like for this particular profiler, it's not supposed to go touch the bottom, for example. So we will program it to drop the weight at a certain depth. And then after you've done that, I also need to make the interface so that there's a way to get the data back out when it comes back. The main interface really is just a text file. So what they provide is a text file.
On your side, when you're designing it to accept that text file, what programs are you using?
Python is the programming language I use. Python is a very popular programming language in the science and engineering field. It's especially good for prototyping like this because it's very easy to modify and write. So the text file is on the computer itself, on the profiler computer, and the profiler computer will talk to this board in order to control the output, the power output, to the various instruments. So there are 8 channels here, so there are 8 things it's controlling through this board. There are other things going on like voltage regulation, fuse. So when it comes in, it's just like a green piece of fiberglass. So I put on the components and then solder it, and then test it, and then program it. I like this kind of things where it requires like a system thinking. For a typical human, you can only hold a few things in your head at a time. So I can't have like, oh, this is like a long list of things you need to configure, you need to remember all to do this. So I need to have some way, like say, sensible defaults or some kind of understandable warning if something's not right.
The components that you're working with on the Hadal Profiler, are they designed for deep sea work, or are they designed for more surface or land-based work and you have to modify them for deep depths?
Yeah, most of the components on the Hadal Profiler is custom bespoke, even like prototype stage.
Oh.
Yes, so let's say camera, lights, pressure sensors, those are off the shelf. The payload, the scientific payloads, those are like custom, like one-offs. A lot of them are experimental.
We are looking for a few heroes, mentors, trailblazers, innovators, a passion to change lives, spark curiosity, open hearts, and awaken minds, help students answer the question, who am I? This could be your calling, but this is no job. It's the journey of a lifetime. Be a hero. Be a teacher.
You're watching Voice of the Sea. We're talking with UH Manoa undergraduate students to learn about their experiences working with researchers and testing the Hadal Profiler. What is it like to go to sea and do science aboard a ship?
It's cool. With most work, I find it's like you go to work, you go home, but when you're on a boat, you're just kind of at work all the time. But it's also still fun because you're with a lot of people that are like-minded. So you're at work all the time, hanging out with friends at the ocean. So there's not much to complain about.
Can you tell me what y'all are prepping for?
We are prepping for our first launch of the Hadal Profiler, and we are going through our checklist to figure out everything that we need to do before we launch.
Tell me about some of the operations with the Hadal Profiler.
There was a lot of help needed with the assembly of it and like the pre-checklist with launching. There's some technical things that go on, and I was able to just be hands that were able to help there. Update, it just went in the water. It went in.
And then once it does come back to the surface, what do you do?
We will like hook up a cord to it, attach another cord to it, and then the giant A-frame will lift it up and it'll cut back on the boat, and then we have to start data processing, which is another issue. That's where you find out if the Hadal Profiler actually worked or if it didn't work, what went wrong. Right now I'm an undergraduate student, but I'm hoping to go to grad school at UH Manoa, working with a lot of the data that comes back from the Hadal cruises from like the New Zealand trip and the later Marianas Trench trip. I'd get to find my own project within the data that the Hadal Profiler gives, which I'm very excited for.
I started off as a volunteer, and I went on a cruise my freshman year. There was like pretty much no experience required for it, so as a freshman, like 2 months into college, it was a great time for me. Just like going out the first time as a freshman, just like it was a whole new world opened up to me. I'd never been out like on a research cruise before or done anything like similar to that. And then from there, they invited me back for another cruise, and eventually a job opened up for them as a student project assistant. I work on the Hawaiian Ocean Time Series cruises. The acronym for that is HOT Cruises.
And what is their sort of the goal of the HOT cruises?
The goal is to keep a continuous time series to see how climate change is affecting the ocean. It's been going on for like 35 years now. The continuous progress is showing us how climate change has been affecting us in real time.
So describe for me your thesis project.
The goal is to analyze the bioacoustics data that comes from the Hadal Profiler and to see where there's most activity, like based on sonar. A lot of boats will take sonar and go straight down to the seafloor, but what the Hadal Profiler does is it descends to the seafloor while taking data out. So it offers a really interesting perspective. Additionally, the video data helps like just put a picture to what's getting pinged out there.
Follow the action as the Hadal Profiler heads out on its next testing cruise and then on to the Chromatic Trench and beyond. Go to voiceofthesea.org to learn more. Follow us on social media at Voice of the Sea TV. Mahalo for watching Voice of the Sea. Exploring Our Fluid Earth is the dynamic curriculum developed by the University of Hawaii's Curriculum Research and Development Group. The award-winning Fluid Earth and Living Ocean textbooks are now interactive and online. New activities, updated content, and a teacher community. Exploring Our Fluid Earth is now freely available. Find out more at exploringourfluidearth.org.